Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So again, I'm Alan Heron. I'm a founding member of ADFC, and I'm the treasurer of the board. I've been an aquarium diver at the Adventure Aquarium in Camden for 21 years, and I'm now a certified coral restoration diver. It has changed my life. Thank you for spending your valuable lunch hour with us. We'll try to get as much educational and motivational material we can in this hour for you. Hopefully you'll find this a call to action though, because frankly, we need your help to turn the tide with volunteers to save our planet. I hope that after today's program, you'll check out our website, which is aquariumdiversforcoral.org. And you can sign up for our group and find upcoming trips and see the history of what we've already done. Today we have two very interesting speakers. One is our president and brainchild behind ADFC, Michael Anderson, and he'll be followed by Gabrielle Rosenbacher. She's the educational program manager for Reef Renewal USA. After Gabrielle speaks, we will take any questions you may have, but please list them in the Q&A section of the Google Meets app, which is on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's three geometric shapes, a triangle, a square, and a circle. If you click on that, that's where the Q&A location is. So with no further ado, Mike, you're up.
Yeah, did you hit record?
I hit it before. I'll double check and make sure it's still on.
Because I thought it said stop.
Your video is being recorded.
Okay, good. All right. So again, good afternoon. I really appreciate everyone being here. It's a motivating factor for me to keep ADFC moving forward. We're now 4 years old, a little over 4 years old. We've worked with 7 different foundations in the Florida Keys and around the Caribbean. Working with the foundations and their scientists is an extremely interesting process to be a part of, that you are engaged in actually helping to save the environment. The scientists alone cannot do all of this work. They need help, and especially at this time where we're once again faced with high ocean temperatures and a decline in the coral, that more volunteers are needed to work with the foundations in order to get ahead of this whole situation. Today we have Reef Renewal USA. We'll be working with them in August. We have still this year 2 other trips. One's in 10 days from now with iCare and Key Largo, and we'll be working with Reef Renewal Bonaire in November. You can find this on our website. Alan already mentioned that we have applied for a grant. We won't know about that grant until September, and in September we'll plan out 2025-2026 calendar year for our schedule and where we'll be diving. Obviously the grant going through will influence where we're going and how frequently we will be doing trips. So at this time, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Gabrielle. If people have questions, again, put them in the Q&A, and we'll address those like the last 10 minutes of the presentation. Gabrielle, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mike and Alan. It is a pleasure to be here. So without further ado, let's get started. If there is ever anything that's not lining up with what I'm saying, please let me know, because as I share my screen on Google Meet, I cannot see myself or any of you. So if there is anything that does not look quite right, let me know. But it should all be very easy. So I wanted to start by just setting the stage and taking a journey back in time to 1974 to get an idea of what these ecosystems once were. So I personally have not seen a beautiful thriving reef like this, sadly enough, which is why I love to start our presentations out with a photo of just looking back at what Florida's coral reef, specifically Carey's Fort Reef off of northern Key Largo, looked like, and the habitat that it provided, the fish that are around there. It is just absolutely beautiful. But sadly enough, we have been facing degradation on this reef since 1974. And here we can see some side by side. So as we fast forward in time, we are seeing drastic changes that this reef has endured over the last 50 years or so. So not only is our reef suffering from the effects of climate change, but also lack of responsible recreation, pollution, and poor water quality. So I'll let your imagination do the work, unfortunately, as this last photo was taken in 2004, and we are now 20 years later than that. So essentially, we are looking at most of Florida's coral reef as this bottom right photo, what we call a coral graveyard, really just dead and broken pieces of coral that once were these beautiful habitats, these beautiful structures that provided homes for marine life. It provided coastal protection for the Florida Keys specifically, and so on and so forth. So as if these reefs weren't facing enough challenges already, they have endured an unprecedented bleaching event last summer, the summer of 2023. And this bleaching event has now become NOAA's fourth bleaching event in history, and really has become a historical moment in time for the field of coral restoration in the Florida Keys. So this graph shows sea surface temperatures on July 10th of 2023. And if you can see the Keys at the bottom of Florida there, that little stretch of island chain, it is surrounded by even a darker reddy orange type of color. And that is signifying that we're in between, I can't really tell, but in between about 30 and 35 degrees Celsius. So to put that in perspective, 30 degrees Celsius is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. 35 would probably be around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So our corals are happy in about 86 degrees Fahrenheit, or that 30-degree Celsius mark. That's a pretty warm temperature, but they are able to endure that generally with no problem. But however, seeing this high temperatures at such an early time in the summer of last year was of major concern. So just to ensure that we're all on the same page going forward, I wanted to touch on a few details of coral bleaching. As you can see in this image, we have zooxanthellae that inhabit the coral tissue. So this is a symbiotic relationship between the algae, zooxanthellae, and our coral skeletons, our coral animal, exactly. So the zooxanthellae lives inside our coral polyps, and when it gets too hot in the water, they're like, it's too hot in here. I've got to get out of my home and go find a new place to live because it's too hot for me here. And so these zooxanthellae are expelled from the coral tissue. Now, remember, the zooxanthellae provide our corals with about 95% of their energy because algae can photosynthesize, and that is providing so much energy for our corals to happily live and survive. And the rest of the work is done by the actual coral tissues and those tentacles that are coming out and filter feeding and things like that. But our zooxanthellae really provide them with a lot of their energy. So that being said, if the zooxanthellae leaves our coral, one, I want to make it clear that coral is not dead yet. The coral is just bleached. It still has living tissue, generally, where it can still feed itself for a period of time. Now, that's what becomes very important here, is that period of time. How long is that period of time? Will the temperatures come back to normal? So what we saw last summer was that the temperatures did not return to normal. But as you see on this graphic here, if the water temperature returns to normal within, let's say, a few weeks at the most, 2 weeks or so, depending on the heat. Of course, it depends. But generally, that coral can re-inhabit its zooxanthellae and continue to survive and thrive, and it will be just fine. However, that prolonged temperature stress is what turns our bleached coral into our dead corals. And so that's unfortunately what we were witnessing happening in a major scale on Florida's coral reef last summer. So in the previous slide, we saw how hot it was on July 10th of 2023. So let's fast forward and see what the reef is looking like in 12 days from them, July 22nd in 2023. This is Horseshoe Reef, another northern site on Florida's reef, and we have these beautiful elk horns here. You can notice that they're obviously struggling at this point in time. Some of them have a few zooxanthellae on the coral that's closest to the bottom of the photo. You see it kind of being a little patchy. It doesn't look quite dead to me yet, but it certainly doesn't look happy, and it's not a good sign to see something like this. So these are just want to make clear that these are very sizable elk horns that we see. We don't generally witness this size of elkhorn on our reef anymore in this day. So it can be very, very devastating to see these large coral colonies being affected in such a negative way in such a quick amount of time. So let's fast forward to another site, North Dry Rocks on July 22nd. So that same day. So we noticed that these elkhorn corals, they look like they're actually doing pretty okay. Of course, there are some patchy spots, which can be expected during the summer of some high heats, but generally they look really happy. So going through to different reef sites, they all are experiencing this bleaching event at a different point in time. So it could be the same day, but some of them might be suffering more that day, and some of them might be doing better that day. And then their timeline is different. So these are all genetically different types of corals, although they are all elkhorn corals. So now we are really starting to zone in on our different genotypes. But going back to this event in the summer, so here we have this site on North Dry Rocks on July 22nd. Things look okay. But sadly, the heat had persisted. It had persisted up until September, October, and some into November. And here is the same site on December 5th. So these types of scenes were not uncommon on last summer, and unfortunately, they're really more common than not these days. So to give you more of a perspective of the extreme heat that Florida's reef faced last summer, let's take a look at this graph, which shows us sea temperatures of different reef sites. So you can see each line, the different colors are representing a different reef site, specifically the iconic reef sites that are identified by NOAA. And this is showing from January to August. So it gives you that perspective of how much cooler it truly is in the wintertime here in terms of the sea temperatures. And we see this line of this bleaching threshold at 30.5 degrees Celsius. So as I mentioned, 30 degrees Celsius was 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is probably 87 or 88, something like that. But we see here that in these high month and these early months, the end of May, we were already reaching the bleaching threshold, which was a very, very bad sign at that time. And then we take a look at July. And just to give a perspective, some of these numbers shouldn't be flying off the graph until August. August is generally our hottest months, August and September. But these heats are affecting us earlier and earlier in the season, which is kind of a telltale sign that things aren't going to be returning to normal as quickly as we had imagined or had thought, because in the fall, usually we get a storm or something comes by and things are generally balanced back out again. But this was not the case last summer. We just kept seeing this trend grow taller and taller and taller, meaning higher and higher heats. So these are our sites, and this is just really showcasing how hot it got last summer and how early it got to be this hot. So with great sadness, Florida's reef has now lost about 99.9% of our acropora corals, which is our elkhorn and our staghorns, which really were our main foundational reef building corals on Florida's coral reef. So this has become quite concerning and truly has changed the focus of restoration now on Florida's coral reef. So with all of the knowledge that we gained last summer from the heat event that happened, we really are more prepared to face another extremely hot summer. And this red line that you are seeing that starts on the left side of the screen, that is our heat this summer. But I want to show you the orange line right below that, that sticks out most of the graph. That orange line was sea surface temperatures last summer. So you can see just how much beyond the average this last summer was. And unfortunately enough, we are already witnessing this trend being even hotter that much earlier in the year. So even our winter months have been recorded as warmer than ever before. So we are starting to notice that this is not something that was a one-off. It wasn't a one-time bleaching event. Now we've got 10, 20 years until another one could happen. This is something that now we are facing as an everyday challenge, a yearly challenge. We are realizing that the ocean temperatures are getting hotter and hotter every year. by significant amounts. And we need to be able to act accordingly to allow us to anticipate how best to protect our corals this time around and any time that might come again in the future. Oh, apologies, those arrows didn't show up, but that's the orange line I was talking about from last summer, and we have the start of this summer as well. So on the bright side, we did have an opportunity to observe our corals in our nurseries during this bleaching event, and it really allowed us to gain an incredible amount of insight on which coral genotypes could withstand these high temperatures. So by September 22nd, we have been in the 90 degrees Fahrenheit for probably a month and a half, at least 6 weeks. In the beginning of August, my temperature at 30 feet was reading 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right around where these coral structures are sitting. So these corals have been through a lot. So to even see the corals on the right side still surviving, that they're elkhorn corals, that they're unbleached, was of a great happiness to us. And we noticed then that there were other genotypes of elkhorn coral that did become bleached. So now we're starting to really increase our monitoring efforts on which specific genetic types of these species are going to withstand these high heat scenarios much better, so that going forward, we can focus more energy into the genotypes that are faring better instead of continuing to propagate and want to outplant this coral 045 on the left. We would rather put more time and energy into propagating and outplanting 005 because, well, it will have a better chance on the reef if it withstood last summer's heat. So faced with this crisis, the Reef Renewal team responded quickly with innovative solutions, which was really all we could do. We weren't the only practitioner dealing with this high heat stress last summer. We were just one of many here in the Keys. As Mike mentioned, you're working with iCare, with other institutions that are working on helping save this reef. We've got CRF down here, we've got MOAT, we've got Reef Relief. There are a lot of organizations that are really just trying to help this reef. And that said, there were a lot of corals in nurseries that we were getting way too hot, and we needed to act quickly. So some of these larger organizations were able to go find places to put some of their corals. Some of our corals were removed from our nurseries and brought to other locations on land, particularly the Reef Institute in West Palm Beach. I believe it's in West Palm Beach. They housed some of our corals because they have aquarium style settings. So since now, Reef Renewal had only been functioning in the ocean and in remote office spaces. We didn't have an on-land aquarium style of a setting to keep any corals because that wasn't the nature of our work at the time. Our work was to go work in our coral nurseries, do as much maintenance, take care of those corals, and then plant them onto the reef. So these situations had come, further and fewer in between, and they just seemed like other circumstances that were happening on our reef to our corals. But this time was a lot different. This felt like a rescue event. We had to rescue as many corals as we possibly could within a matter of time before they became deceased. I mean, the temperatures were so high where that period between being bleached and being dead was shortened to a few days at the most. We didn't have those week stretches in between because it really was that much hotter than that 86, 87, 88 degrees Fahrenheit. So essentially, there was not enough land-based space for us to bring all of our corals that we really wanted to save. And we decided to move some of our corals to a deeper water nursery. And this was done very quickly. All the permitting, everything that came together was done so gracefully, and it was an emergency. It really gave the effect that this is emergency situation, and we need to do everything we can in terms of getting all of this together to be able to move corals and place corals at a different site. Generally, that can take months and months of going through hoops to be able to permit something to be able to be in this spot in the ocean. This time, this was done within a day, and we were able to work with all of those institutions to, it was such a community effort that although it was extremely saddening, it was very nice to see everybody coming together to help each other. So essentially, we created this Upper Keys deep water nursery, which, as you can see, wasn't too far from our main Tavernier nursery where most of our corals were held. So essentially, this nursery was about 70 feet in depth. And the idea was to move corals there, keep them at a lower depth in hopes of them just riding out the rest of the hot summer. Yes, the temperatures were not incredibly cooler, but they were a few degrees cooler, which in a time like this really can help. So we had so many hands on deck, including our team. Volunteers flew in from around the country, and local NOAA divers who were there and able to help us. So about 96 anchor points were created to hold coral structures at this deep water nursery. And we did move corals to this deep water nursery. Some survived, some didn't. I can't say it was the full solution to the problem, but it did really help secure some of our corals going into the fall and winter, and it allowed them to survive there at a deeper depth, away from a lot of that high heat. So again, with each challenge, we're trying to innovate, trying to come up with new solutions. Even if something isn't the perfect right answer at that time, the best thing we can do is think of some ideas and try it. So we implemented the use of these shade cloths. So this, as you can see, is a boulder coral tree. And we have these trays. There's other layers of trays below these trays that are pictured here. So at the top, we installed these shade cloths in hopes of simply just shielding the corals from a lot of the direct sun exposure. So imagine you're sitting at the beach and you have an umbrella over you. It truly is that much cooler in a 95-degree day to have that umbrella over you versus not. So, I can't say that they're perfect, but they did help a little bit, and we were able to try something new in this time of crisis. So you can see that this photo was taken on August 12th of last year, which was right there amidst that high heat stress. So now we are really faced with our greatest question of all once again. Can reefs be restored, and what does that look like? So this question is not something that has one answer to it throughout the rest of time. This question is something that needs to be raised again and again to ensure that we are doing our very best job to help the reef. It's not just going to be the same thing. More things are going to keep happening to almost disrupt this, because that's so far what's been happening. More high temperatures, more heat. So we need to look at this question with a fresh perspective and say, okay, how can we best now help restore this reef? And what do we need to do to get there? So at this point, we need to move beyond staghorn and elkhorn coral. At one time, they were our focus, and we were outplanting hundreds and hundreds of staghorn and elkhorn coral. But as we saw, these were the coral species that fared the least well going into this bleaching event. And we've lost, as I mentioned, 99.9% of that on Florida's coral reef. So do we continue to propagate and put energy and time and resources into staghorn and elkhorn? Most likely not the best idea to move forward. We need to also find heat and disease resistant corals. So I didn't even start on the disease talk today, because there is so much to be covered in terms of bleaching and all of the other things that these coral reefs are facing, but not to mention there are diseases out there. Stony coral tissue loss disease, black band, white band. I mean, let's hear it, folks. The coral reefs are facing it, so many trials. But we need to look and see if we can find these heat and disease resistant corals. Like I showed the two elkhorns side by side. We need to focus on the ones that survived, not the ones that didn't. So we also need to develop new genetic lines of resistant corals, which means perhaps reproducing our corals that have been doing so well in a land-based system. We can bring them there, have, you know, our two species of corals, or our two, sorry, genetic types of corals that are doing very well in the high heat, and hopefully be able to breed them. So that's a new thing that is really starting to become apparent to us now. And lastly, we really need to find ways to do all of this at scale and for less money. So again, this is really where volunteers do become involved, and having help from volunteers can amplify the amount of work that we can do, like, incredibly. So finding new ways to do this at scale, meaning having lots of people able to help us, or finding really efficient ways to go about the work that we're doing and then do it for less money, meaning how can we create, you know, the best process going forward in terms of our inventory, our supplies, all of the things that we use, and, you know, use less money at the end of the day. So a lot of restoration thus far has been going in this direction of how can we be more efficient, more effective, and really restore the reefs in the best way possible going forward. As I said, sadly, we probably won't be spending as much time with our elkhorn and staghorn corals. We just can't put as much energy and resources into something that we know is not going to survive on the reef at this time. But look at these little guys. They actually did really, really well. So these are some of our star corals at Conch Reef, which is a northern reef, on September 30th of last year. So we'd seen dead and dying corals all the way up to this point, but here we are at September 30th, and these little star corals are doing just totally fine, and they're fusing together. These are corals that we've planted, as you can see the tags in the sides of them there, but they're doing really well. So we need to find those points of hope, focus on those species, and continue to propagate and put more corals out there like this that are going to do really well. And here we are again with some more little star corals that look great on October 13th at Sombrero Reef. So this is down in Marathon. There was actually a report that came out of Marathon saying that Sombrero Reef reached record high temperatures, which was absolutely true, and there was 100% mortality. So when we went back to Sombrero Reef and did our monitoring, found these little guys, we were like, hey, these guys survived. We want to make sure that there is some sort of a hope for us to grab onto, because if we're talking 100% mortality, this and that, I mean, the future becomes very bleak in your mind, and we need to encourage others to be involved in this, that hope is not lost. We need to focus on these, even as small as they might be, these winners, and move forward with these. So that said, a lot of our focus moving forward is going to be on our star corals and our brain corals. So I couldn't exactly tell you why they're doing better than staghorn or elkhorn, but they are doing better in this heat. And that is why we're going to continue to focus and do a lot more work on propagating and planting brain, star, and then these other corals, as you see down here. We've got our blade fire coral, ivory tree coral, mustard hill, and knobby finger coral. So we're going to be looking for these winners. We're going to be looking for corals that have been exposed to extreme heat, which probably isn't hard to find now that most of Florida's reef has been exposed to extreme heat. We're going to also, though, look for corals that have been exposed to extreme cold. So believe it or not, there have been winners where the sea temperatures have gotten very cold. This was well before I have been living in the Keys, but I've heard that it has gotten very, very cold in the water in the past, into, you know, the 50s degrees. And then we want to look for corals exposed to disease, because disease is still a huge threat to our corals, as particularly our brain and star corals. So we want to look for those that have been exposed to disease and have been able to fight through that disease, essentially. And then we want to look for corals from diverse habitats. We want to go look in canals. We want to go look in places where under bridges, where water is flowing in and out at a high rate, where there's extreme high tides, extreme low tides, in bays where the water gets so warm that they're nearly out of the water at a certain time of day. So we want to go to all these diverse habitats and make sure that we can collect corals that have been able to withstand a diversity of unforeseen circumstances, essentially, so that when something else is going to happen, unfortunately, we can have hopefully the hardiest and strongest corals that have been out there on the reef. So that said, all of these little red dots along the Florida Keys here, and mind you, this Florida Keys stretch is about 100 miles long. So we have collected corals from all of these different sites. So from north to south. And you can see some of them are really close to the land, which is probably under bridges and canals, areas like that. Some are further out in the reef and basically diversely spread up and down the Keys. So when we go out and we find a new coral, we're going to tag and measure it at the reef. And then we're going to tag the coral and bring it to the nursery. We're going to chip off a piece of it, bring it to our nursery to start a new genetic type of that coral, and then continue to propagate that coral. So moving forward, since last summer, we have actually become involved in a new coral farm that is located in Ruskin, Florida. And so although we never thought we would have a land-based coral growing system, last summer really pushed us beyond what we ever thought Reef Renewal was going to be doing. So we are going to start bringing corals up to this aquaculture farm, essentially, in Ruskin, Florida. And it's going to be a place where we can house corals. We can hopefully experiment in other scientific things like spawning our corals, breeding them, trying to find, heat-resistant corals, et cetera, et cetera. So at this point, a lot of things are going to start happening in a new direction for Reef Renewal. We still are absolutely going to have our in-water coral nurseries, but we need to flow with what is happening out there. We can't just say, no, that wasn't on our list of things to do. Now we've got this space in Ruskin, Florida, whereas if any other emergency would happen, we are able to bring our corals here to safely keep them in aquarium style settings. So merging now just into a little bit more specifically about Reef Renewal and what sets us apart here when restoring Florida's coral reef. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of other restoration practitioners here in the Florida Keys doing really, the same mission that we are. But there are some things that do set us apart as Reef Renewal here. And one thing I really like to highlight is our vertical rope nurseries. So in terms of doing this at a more scalable approach with the less cost behind us, we've created the Reef Renewal Vertical Rope Nursery, which we call a VERN. And this is a method to grow our corals, specifically our staghorn and elkhorn coral. But this is a minimal upkeep for us. We don't have to do much maintenance. They grow incredibly rapidly. We are searching for a biodegradable material so we could eventually plant this entire rope. But at the moment, we just propagate from this rope. And then we end up taking these corals and planting them. So it's much cheaper. It is much more efficient, faster, and less effort in terms of maintenance that goes into working with these corals. So if you do come and visit a Reef Renewal nursery, this is something unique to us and to our nursery that you would be able to experience. And we also work incredibly with the community and with different groups that come down and book dive trips with us. We have an internship program that we run. We have 2 interns every 4 months. We just actually launched the next advertisement for our internship program that's starting this fall. But we work with the community because we really realize that the community is really, really what matters. All of the scientific efforts are obviously incredibly important, but it's equally important to engage with others, specifically our local community and the United States. Anybody who's here. I mean, this is United States' only barrier reef. We need to really protect this. And how every single hand that is involved helps. So to get people to fall in love with this coral, to help them protect it and restore reefs, we really just need to create that care and that love for the reef systems that I'm sure everybody here on this call has. So obviously, my favorite days are working with students, working with interns, and working with group dive trips. I mean, there's nothing more inspiring than seeing their eyes light up when they go and do a coral reef dive, specifically when they're planting coral or they're propagating coral, even just cleaning the structures the coral grow on. I mean, there is sometimes no better feeling than coming out of the water and saying, wow, I just did that. You know, I helped, and you experienced something pretty incredible. So we just want to inspire folks to take action in whatever way they possibly can. So the first step in Reef Renewal to become a volunteer with us is to complete our online training. So we've actually created all of our training and put it online into a learning management system where you can go through the courses at your own convenience before your vacation down to the Keys and with no time limit. You can complete this at any time once you're signed up for it, and then can always revisit these courses when you are, let's say, coming back for another trip or so. So you'd get logged into this system. We have quite a few courses here. This is still a work in progress. So we have quite a few more courses that are in the works at the moment and starting to or will be added into this course list. But these are kind of our main, most basic, most common things that Reef Renewal does and that a volunteer would do with us. So they all consist of short videos with some learning as well, some text and learning, and some quizzes at the end. So this is basically the first step of becoming a Reef Renewal volunteer, is reaching out to me to do the online training. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some specifics about volunteering with Reef Renewal. So we are a very, very small organization. So there are only 3 employees at Reef Renewal at this time. And that just shows how incredibly important volunteers are for us. So if you are with a group, like a group dive trip, let's say, or with a dive shop, or even if you just have a group that is wanting to come down to the Keys and work and dive with Reef Renewal. So the best way to do this would be to connect with me, reserve those dates, and then book a local dive charter. We do not have large vessels to take groups out. So generally when a group comes, they are in charge of booking a charter at whichever dive shop they choose. And we communicate through all of this, and I give suggestions depending on your location and all that good stuff. But it is the responsibility of the group to book that dive charter, pay for that dive charter, and then our staff would join you on that boat and take you to our nurseries and do whatever sort of tasks that we need done during that time. Then once everything is really booked and ready to go, we've got your dates on our schedules, on our calendars, I will sign you up for the online training. You and the entire group will be able to do online training at their own convenience. And then we just really hope that there's great weather during your visit. So it is obviously weather dependent. There might be windy days where we do not go visit our nursery or a reef, but that is just in the nature of diving. So otherwise, if you are just an individual and you want to come down and volunteer with us on your own time as a solo diver, or 1 or 2, I guess so, you could still reserve the dates with me. So I would always be the first person to connect with to get all of that stuff coordinated and get the ball rolling. And then in that case, you most likely will be able to join on a Reef Renewal boat in Tavernier or Big Pine Key. So our boat capacity is about 3 to 4 divers because we do 3 tank dives when we go out on our work vessels. And this way it is completely free of cost, where you just come. You have to provide your own dive gear in a situation like this, but obviously can be rented from local shops in town. But this way you get a much more personalized experience working with Reef Renewal staff specifically, but on one of our boats and kind of, you know, part of the crew for that day. So again, I say this as weather dependent. I do my absolute best to schedule and organize you on a boat. But that said, we only have 2 people at this time who run boats, and will, you know, do our best to get you on that boat during your visit. Again, just weather dependent and dependent on the tasks that occur if we do book something a few months in advance. But I am there through the whole process, there to help answer any questions and make sure that when you come, something happens. If we get blown out, we try to look at if there's any land-based work to complete as well, just to give you a full experience when you come. So all that we ask going forward from the Reef Renewal team is just spread the word. Our reefs need help, and there's ways to help no matter how. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know how that stopped. But always just spread the word. Share with other divers. Share with other groups that you know that this is happening, and we're in a very pivotal time in terms of the state of Florida's coral reef. So this summer we'll really be able to see kind of what ends up happening this summer with the state of the reef going forward. And lastly, just follow us on social media. It's a great way for you to stay in touch with us. It's Reef Renewal USA on Facebook and Instagram, specifically USA, because there is, as Mike mentioned, a Bonaire location, there's a Curacao location, and some other network members. So we are reefrenewalusa.org and Reef Renewal USA on Facebook, Instagram. You can get any updates on there, but also just kind of follow along with our work. And then from my personal standpoint, continue to make lifestyle changes. Continue to bring your reusable bags, your reusable water bottles. All of those small actions add up and truly help. And let me tell you, pollution is a huge problem down here. Although we are facing these greater problems of bleaching and climate change, but the pollution really does become an issue. So doing the best that you possibly can in your daily life to make changes that can help this planet is something that you can do no matter from where you are, and you are still helping the coral reefs. So thank you so very much for your time. I want to continue this momentum, you know, throughout wherever all of you are from today. And I look forward to hopefully working with some of you in the future and getting you involved in Reef Renewal. So I will enter my email in the chat. That might be I'll put it there at least for the moment, so you can all take it down, but it is just Gabrielle@reefrenewalusa.org. And that'll be the best place to connect with me.
Gabrielle, thank you very much. Really a fantastic presentation. You covered A to Z. There's quite a few people in this group that are coming down in August. We're working through Frank at Captain Hook.
Wonderful.
And so, yeah, that's great. There are a lot of questions that I have. One is, a lot of the people that are coming have been certified either in Bonaire, with Coral Restoration Foundation, with iCare, some from Curacao. So I think I brought this question up before, but I just want to clarify. Do they need to take the course or audit? I think we were going to audit the course, right? Okay. The people that are already certified would audit the course with you or with whoever's teaching the course. And then so they don't have to like get recertified. They're already certified. So the people who are coming that don't have any certifications yet, they need to take the course and pay for the certification. Yeah, I put a couple of questions in the Q&A. One is, you mentioned that you were working deeper. Are you still working deeper? And if so, what are the challenges to doing that?
So we currently are not still working deeper. After the heat event had kind of let up, so we say, we did bring all of those corals back to our main nursery in Tavernier to be able to work on them regularly. So obviously there were a lot of challenges at 30 feet, we don't face any worries about going into deco or anything like that at all. You can generally do a 2-hour, 2.5-hour dive and have no care in the world. Besides that, you're thirsty or you want to go back to the boat. So at this time, we were facing obviously dive limits at 70 feet. We had people doing strenuous work down there, like pounding in anchor points and pulling buoys down, and had to be a lot more wary of the certifications of who was working with us and how qualified they were and how comfortable and experienced they were going down to 70 feet and doing this work. So because of all of the really limits that it had posed for us in terms of time and energy and effort in doing all of that, we are choosing now to focus more on our land-based nursery there in Ruskin, Florida, versus our deeper water nursery. So we still have the anchor points there, and we are able to utilize them if needed for any reason, but hopefully merging a little bit away from that at this time and doing something that will make more sense for us going in the future.
Right. We also have, I just wanted to bring up one other one. You said you are working in Ruskin, right?
Yes.
Do you need volunteer help there with that situation? Because
So yeah.
we like Rob, I don't remember where Rob lives exactly, but we have people who live probably within an hour of Ruskin. So there's the possibility we could have ADFC members helping with the land base also.
That would be wonderful. Yes, it's still very new. So I know that some of our team, our president, our technical, so Mike, Ken, and our operations manager we're up there this week to start working on a science advisory committee. So it is all just starting. Oh, he's 20 minutes away. Wonderful. So as that gets going, right now we don't have any corals there at the moment, but we will throughout this summer. So as that gets going, like I said, that's a great way to like follow us on social media to see, because that's where we will post things where we're looking for volunteers or volunteers needed. And then I will also make sure to reach out to you, Mike, and your network when that is up and running and if we're needing help there.
Because we have about 4 people in that area now. So
yeah, that's wonderful. I'm sure we will.
They might, be upset that they're not bringing their tanks with them, but
right, it's a different scene, that's for sure.
Alan,
Mike, we had a question. Yeah, we had a question from Ed, by the way, is another board member. More of an observation. He commented that stag and elkhorn have a lot more surface area than a lot of other corals because they're surrounded by 360 degrees by the water. And he was curious if that's why they seem to have a higher mortality rate with the rising heat than maybe the stony corals do. What do you think?
At this time, his guess is as good as mine. They are just, in my eyes, much more fragile to work with. One starts to go and the whole thing will end up dying. So I don't know exactly the science behind why, but it's just been devastating to see because yes, they have that much more surface interval. They're that much more just beautiful and magnificent. But a lot of those corals of those photos too, those were planted a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. So those were our signs of hope. And now to see those, in terms of hope for restoration, not survive through something like this is just, devastating. So whatever the reason may be, we'll see going forward how things change. And not to say we're not going to be working with staghorn and elkhorn. We are. We're just not going to be focusing as much on those as our main survivors and main reef builders at this time.
Dave Friedman had his hand up early on here. I wanted to recognize you, Dave. Yeah. Go ahead. You're still muted, I think. Where'd you go?
Dave,
sorry, I was still muted. Yeah, can you guys hear me? Sorry about that. I'm pretty sure there was someone before me, Alan, I believe there was someone named
Alan.
That's
me. I'm already talking, so it's okay.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
I wanted to know that I had you guys on the line. So
yeah. So this is a bit of a doozy of a question. I apologize. So I understand that, the resiliency of coral is of the utmost importance at this stage, and we're basically not basically, we are facing a mass extinction crisis. So it seems to me as though no matter how outlandish, we should really be considering all options. So what I want to kind of understand is regarding resiliency itself. You mentioned you were going to explore, potentially start exploring under bridges and canals and whatnot. And that leads me to believe that you may be considering artificial freshwater resiliency coral. Now, I myself have been looking into that as well. I don't know if that's something that you're pursuing, but that I'm speaking with the founder of Azul Bio. His name is Benjamin Alva, and he works with coral microbiome boosters, CMBs. So that is something that's a very big topic, at least CMBs, not freshwater corals. But I'm very specifically curious if that's where you were headed when you brought that topic up.
So not exactly. That is very intriguing though, and I can't say I know too much about freshwater corals. However, where we are when we are thinking about going into canals and going and finding corals that are in different situations, essentially, in different environments, we want to make sure that we're getting these corals that have been able to withstand whatever they have been going through where they are, and then ideally bring them into our labs and reproduce them with other corals that have also faced similar feats, essentially, and survived. So it's more of essentially breeding these corals in a controlled environment, which would be kind of the next step. And there can be a lot of controversy over like breeding corals and our super coral, trying to find, the one most resilient coral. Well, it might not be resilient to something else that comes along down the line. So it is sometimes tricky, and so a game that we never really thought we were going to be a part of, besides perhaps just providing some corals for some scientists to do this work. But I'm sure we'll be working with some nearby institutions in the future as this does just continue to grow and gain more traction, and we gain the help of others, where we're more of, the practical field researchers rather than our lab science microbiome. Like, I haven't necessarily gone in depth with stuff like that, but
Okay.
we want to utilize those folks who have that knowledge to be able to do the best we can with the corals that we do have.
There's to answer David, both questions, there's a lot of people who are looking into the shallow corals that are surviving. What's this? Boston Kirby, I forget where he is, in Thailand or Indonesia, that they're focusing on that as a solution. So they're not trying to genetically change anything, but they're looking at what's naturally surviving and bringing those into action. So go look up the canals, look in the bays, look and see where those are surviving on their own.
Is there and I don't know if anyone else has a question, so I'm sorry if I'm taking over, but is there I've been studying this a little bit, so is there some kind of evolutionary link to, again, I'm very new to this field, so this is why I'm asking, is there an evolutionary link between ancient corals, and feel free to jump in, correct me if I'm wrong, ancient corals and marine seabeds in such as places that have shale, I believe, like places like Utah, like the Great Salt Lakes, that kind of area?
I don't think I could answer that accurately for you.
The most I can say is that corals have gone extinct in the past and they've come back, but we don't have 20 million years to wait for them to come back. So no. We got to deal with it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So our technical director, his big term is that we are selling hope and buying time, because we absolutely understand that this is not going to save the reef. This is not the one solution, fits all. We need policies to change. We need things to change in our overall ocean health and planetary health in order for these reefs to kind of be able to kickstart themselves back to health. We're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it at the moment, unfortunately. And
Yeah,
yeah,
life support. It's like putting
Yeah.
something on a
Yes.
respirator.
yes. So we're like fighting against time, basically, buying time and
Yeah.
selling enough hope to hopefully others who will become, involved in this and maybe get to the right places. And with some time, hopefully a short amount of time, we'll start getting back to a healthier reef. But yeah, we definitely need all the help we can get down here. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alan, you see any other questions out there?
No, nothing on the. Oh, Sue Horowitz. I just saw you pop on. What did it say?
Well, Sue had a question, about, it's like some of us have multiple certifications now. So Sue was asking, do we have to get certified again when we're down there with you? And basically, we're going to have to audit the course to see the difference in their techniques versus what we've experienced in the past. So, we
That's
can,
what we've done with Cozumel. It's the same thing.
right. So
Yeah, well, I'm fully prepared to do the tutorials online, but basically we just have to have them done before we come down in August, right?
Yes, before your dives with us would be the video. So it can be done really whenever. I recommend kind of sooner to when your trip is scheduled, so it's fresh in the mind. But yeah, for us volunteering, we don't want to make it difficult. We want you to be able to come down and volunteer without a lot of hoops to jump through, because that's, what's going to really help this reef is getting as many hands on deck. So as long as you have your own gear, whether you're coming with a dive shop, you can rent gear, of course. All I'm saying is we don't provide gear. We just provide the coral related tools, the online training, and then your guide throughout that experience.
So what I'll do is take the link from you and put it out there along with all of the waivers that we have to do for Captain Hook and for ADFC, so I'll just put it in a package with the whole thing, and everybody does it before we go.
Okay. The one thing with that is that I do it's more individualized learning. So it's like you get a login and a password and can go on and complete those courses. So we can talk about the best way to do that. Maybe I can make you a handful of accounts and people can log on to the same account. It's just more of a fact that you say, oh, this has already been completed. Maybe somebody else has already completed that if you're on that same account. So it's no problem at all for me to create an account for every diver who's coming or every diver who you'd like to be exposed to the courses. But that's just the way it works from the learner's end.
Glad that came up. I'm glad that question came up.
Yeah.
Actually, Ed had a good question to follow up to all this. He wants to know if people who aren't scheduled to take a trip for whatever reason don't have time right now, if they can audit the online portion of the course, and if so, is there a fee for that?
Sure. Yes. No, there is no fee for our online course at this time. We want to provide it to our volunteers to be able to learn and get exposure to this type of work. So there is no fee. You would just simply have to get in touch with me via email, via email, and then I will sign you up for that course, give you the link, assign you a login and password, and then you'd be free to utilize that course as you wish.
All right, so my best way would just be give them an email and say to contact you to sign up for it.
Yes,
Bingo.
exactly. Yep.
Did someone else just log in?
Yeah. Better late than never, I always say.
All right. Yeah, so it's been recorded. So for the people who showed up late, we'll provide you with that as long as we have an email address for you. And the best way would be to just request the recording, because that way we don't accidentally skip giving you the information, because I won't be able to remember who showed up late. So All right. Yeah, if there aren't any other questions, I always feel like I could stay here all day. You know, but yeah. So, any other questions? If no questions, well, we'll close out. And I thank everyone for coming.